Welcome to part 2 of the Sun Cure series, Cancer and God's Healing Sunlight. This is one of my favorite presentations here. I am John EverBlest. For those of you who haven't seen part 1, let's just start. All right. Have you ever questioned the medical science that would have us believe that our all-knowing, all-powerful, loving God created our sun to burn us, age us, blind us, give us cancer, and kill us? Well, it should be questioned. God's word tells us, commands us to test every spirit. So that's what we're going to do here today. If there is refuting science to these long-held medical assertions, we'll use that too. This lecture includes historical stories of some of the surprisingly simple, light-related things that people have done to trigger cancer, and some of the surprising, simple, little light-related things people have done to prevent and reverse cancer. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that it was good. To demonstrate how good it was, God placed Adam and Eve in a garden in the sunlight all day, every day, naked. So here's a question worth asking for you. Why did God create Earth's light 3 days before he created the sun? To address that, we need to first establish that this was created light, the first day of creation. It was not the light from God's presence, for the light that emanates from God is uncreated light. So, why did God create Earth's light the first day, but waited till the fourth day to create the apparent source of that light? He was telling us, I believe, that he alone is the source of all light. Our sun is his proxy light with the authority to represent his light and his character, just like Christians are supposed to do. Now, light was the only creation that God pronounced good twice, the first day and the fourth day. I believe God gave sunlight, I actually do believe this. I believe that God gave sunlight a double blessing, which would explain why sunlight seems to be the most powerful, comprehensive healing agent ever gifted to man, which in turn would explain why Satan and his agents spend so much time demonizing it, time and energy. God tells us, "I am the light of the world." He uses light to represent himself, his character, his truth, his healing power. The classic example of that is this: the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings. Notice the spelling of son. We are reminded that when Adam and Eve fell, God cursed the earth, not the sun. He cursed the earth a total of 3 times, the last one being the flood, of course. Now, because of those curses and sinful man's ever-increasing destruction of earth, our climate is subject to wide fluctuations between hot and cold, but sunlight still retains its healing properties. It's the earth that has gone wacky, not sunlight. Yet sunlight is still relentlessly demonized by the merchants of Pharmacia. That demonization of God's sunlight is an ongoing attack that continually accuses God of lying when he pronounced sunlight good. You ever thought about that? Yet we know that God cannot lie, and that his spoken word is inherent with creative power. So, if he speaks that sunlight is good, then it is indeed good. It cannot be otherwise. It's impossible to be otherwise. This is a clear, plain as the nose on your face, obvious example of why we are to test every spirit. Believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they of God. 1 John 4:1. And yes, even the medical science spirits are to be tried by the word of God. And we may justifiably say, especially the medical spirits, because they hold our lives in their hands. It is written, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God." Yet still, there has ever been a dark science that has worked to extinguish the light of truth. It still is. And we are called to release men from those deceptions that keep them clothed in darkness and living in fear. That's what this presentation is. I'm going to address 9 of the long-standing deceptions about God's sunlight that must be set straight to release the sick into the sunlight. If the sick do not believe that sunlight is safe or know the fabulous things that sunlight can do, they will not see it as a healing agent. So let's arm them with the truth here. Let's begin. Since the beginning of human history, people have lived and worked outdoors during the light of day, absorbing light energy from the sky, an average of 10 hours outdoors each day, 70 hours weekly was common. Since the Industrial Revolution, most Americans work indoors with very little healthy light. So pioneering photobiologist Dr. John Ott, referring to this class of people, coined the term malillumination, a condition that he likened to malnutrition. Malillumination is to light as malnutrition is to food. Today, most people, young and old alike, suffer greatly from malillumination. Weight gain, fatigue, depression, headache, pain, hormonal imbalances, sleep disorders, PMS, lowered immune responses, vitamin deficiencies, and lack of vitality are but a few of the many health problems associated with malillumination. Those weren't just the few, those are the really nice ones. There's horrendous results from malillumination, which we're going to get into. All right, healthy illumination is particularly important during the winter months. All right, we start with this one. Myth 1. We are told that our God's sunlight is carcinogenic and is causing an epidemic of cancer. Do we hear that? God's sunlight is carcinogenic. That's what they're calling it. I wrote a little thing right here under my notes of how I just lambasted that idea, and I took it all out because it wasn't necessary. I think we all know what that means. All right, between 1840 and 2000, the percentage of American workforce in agriculture went from 70% to 2%. If it's true that sunlight is causing an epidemic of cancer, then we would expect that this move to indoor work away from sunlight would have had the exact opposite reaction. No cancer, right? But it didn't. Cancer increased exponentially, as we will see in the very next slide. Here it is. In the US, as sun exposure has decreased by about 90% since 1935, melanoma incidence has increased by 3,000%. Let that absorb in here for a second. So what causes cancer? Scientists from the University of Manchester, England, have studied massive amounts of literature, fossils, and mummified remains from all parts of the world, and spanning millennia in search of evidence of cancer throughout history. Their conclusion? Cancer is caused by pollutants, diet, and lifestyle, and increased rapidly after the Industrial Revolution began. That should be no surprise to us. In other words, cancer is caused by toxicity and deficiency, just like any other disease. Researchers found that cancer was extremely rare in antiquity. Yet as the team moved through the ages, it was not until the 17th century that they found descriptions of operations for breast and other cancers. And the first reports in scientific literature of distinctive tumors have only occurred in the past 200 years, such as scrotal cancer in chimney sweeps in 1775, nasal cancer in snuff users in 1761, and Hodgkin's disease in 1832. There was no diseases caused by broccoli. Did you notice that? No cancer. They found that the disease rate of cancer has risen massively since the Industrial Revolution. In particular, childhood cancer, which could indicate that the rise may not simply be due to people living longer. So, summarize that, nearly 6,000 years working and living in God's sunlight and nature, growing their own food, all races, colors, cultures, and locations, no cancer. 200 to 300 years avoiding God's sunlight and nature, working indoors in artificial light with artificial food, massive cancer rates. This African tribe lived in the sunlight all day, every day, naked, their entire lives, just like Adam and Eve. So would you expect them to have fabulous vitality or be filled with cancer? One of those two things is true. Now, before I answer that, I was given this very presentation a while back in an in-person presentation, and I asked the audience this question, and it just seemed to paralyze the audience. They didn't want to publicly get it wrong. Well, I understand that, but why was this a hard question? It was a simple matter of, what does the Bible say? God pronounced sunlight good. It's simple. Live by every word that proceeded out of the mouth of God. It was the very first pronouncement ever made on planet Earth on any topic. The first endorsement of the first healing agent for mankind. Okay, the next slide gives the answer to this question, and it will vindicate God in his pronouncement of sunlight good. From the Sanitarium News Bulletin, November 1, 1929. Some of the unclothed tribes of Central Africa who live on a diet similar to that of the gorilla, vegetarian diet mostly. They eat a few bugs too. And with their naked bodies bathed in the glowing rays of a tropical sun, are free from parasitic diseases and are possessed of a resistance so high that cancer, one of the scourges of all civilized lands, is unknown, and such a thing as appendicitis was never heard of. Their dark skins have a luster and silken feel that no cosmetic could improve. And the tide of life runs so high in their lithe bodies that there is no end to their endurances. These men run with government dispatches 60 miles a day after day, for hundreds of miles. So what's the answer? Fabulous vitality. Both Native American and Canadian Indians, also scantily clad, had the same kind of fabulous vitality and endurance before at least the Western influences dominated. This African tribe proved that sunlight does not cause cancer. Now, what do you think would happen were we to take another African tribe whose members have also lived all of their lives in the sunlight all day, every day, naked? But something's different. They filter the sunlight on just 2 square inches of the body, the 2 square inches of the eyes. So the question is asked, which is more likely? That the sunglasses prevented the natives from getting glaucoma? Or number 2, that the sunglasses caused cancer? Well, this is a cancer presentation, so I'm giving you a clue. But the real question is, what does the Bible say? The Bible says sunlight good. Therefore, we might suspect that blocking the sun must have bad results rather than good results, right? So let's let history vindicate God's word again. Here's what happened. This is from Dr. John Ott. At a dinner given prior to one of my lectures, I sat next to the daughter of the late Dr. Albert Schweitzer. Our conversation dwelt mostly on her experiences as assistant to her father at Lambarene on the west coast of Africa. I asked her about the rate of cancer of the people in that era. She replied that when her father had first started the hospital, they found, well, no cancer at all. But that now it was a problem. I asked if the people living there had started installing glass windows and electric light in their otherwise simple surroundings, and she said they had not. Then I have jokingly asked her if any of the natives wore sunglasses. She looked startled, and then told me that the natives paddling their dugout canoes up and down the river in front of the hospital often wore no more than a loincloth and sunglasses. And indeed, some wore only the sunglasses. She further explained that the sunglasses represented a status symbol of civilization and education and had a higher bartering value than beads and other such trinkets. So, even though natives are in the tropical sunlight all day, every day, naked their entire lives, they experience no cancer. But when they start blocking God's sunlight from entering just the eyes by wearing sunglasses all day, every day, cancer results. Cancer was not caused by sunlight to the skin, but distorted sunlight to the eyes. This is no normal discovery, folks. This should have been published abroad and kept before the people of the world. This has massive implications in every areas of our lives. Yet the same agencies that tell us that sunlight is carcinogenic tell us that wearing sunglasses is important for our healthy eyes. We cannot mess with God's natural order of things and expect God's healing blessings. God pronounced sunlight good. If we shun God's healing provisions as something to be feared, we will receive exactly what we expect, suffering and death. For that is always what the alternative offers. Skin cancer cleared by light. Oh, that's interesting. Probably a new concept. Again, Dr. John Ott talking. One of my friends had been troubled with skin cancer and on several occasions had undergone minor surgery. He was again having considerable difficulty and his physician had recommended further surgery. However, on his own initiative, he decided to try the same UV ocular therapy that he was giving his wife for her eye condition. Immediately, his skin cancers began to disappear. And within a matter of 4 or 5 months, his skin appeared perfectly normal without surgery or treatment. Now, here's that ocular therapy that Dr. Ott was talking about. 1, spend as much time as possible outdoors, and he's serious about this. Full exposure as much as possible. Avoid wearing any eyewear and looking through any glass. Install full spectrum fluorescent lighting and augment with unfiltered black light in the rooms where most time is spent. Avoid artificial light sources if you can, including TV, and today it would be talking about computer screens, etc. The key here is mostly spend as much time as possible and avoid wearing eyewear. Lung cancer and sunglasses. This is still John Ott. A personal friend of mine told me of an acquaintance of his, a man in his early 70s who had just been diagnosed as having terminal lung cancer. This man lived in the Southwest and wore sunglasses most of the time. My friend sent him a copy of My Ivory Cellar and a set of the instruction sheets that had been given to the 15 patients in New York City for living outdoors as much as possible and avoiding artificial light sources. The elderly lung cancer patient agreed to follow the instructions. The tumor completely disappeared. All he did was take off his glasses. Live outdoors. And he lived for approximately 8 years before dying of a heart complication. Still John Ott. Prostate cancer versus pink eyeglasses. An elderly acquaintance had been diagnosed with prostate cancer and surgery had been recommended. I found that he had for many years been wearing eyeglasses with a light pink tint, and I was able to persuade him to stop wearing these and get some new full spectrum clear UV transmitting spectacles. Unfortunately, folks, they don't make those anymore. I advised him to cut down as much as possible on watching TV and to spend more time outdoors, or at least on an open screen porch. He has now gone for 3 years without surgery, and the problem has apparently disappeared. There are several other stories available concerning pink and light in our health, just not enough to present them here. But beware of pink Pink has a particularly harmful effect in its level of distorting full light. This one right here, leukemia outbreak traced back to green curtains and warm or pink fluorescent lighting. Leukemia, by the way, is a blood cancer. This story is another example of cancer developing because the light entering the eyes had been filtered and distorted. Now here's the 2-minute clip of that. This is John Ott talking.
Here's the St. John Brebeuf School in Niles, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. In 1963, the Communicable Disease Center of the U.S. Public Health Service in Atlanta reported an unusually high rate of leukemia with the children attending this school, the highest rate of any school in the country, 5 times the national average. Many of the national cancer agencies, both public and private, have investigated this situation, but no positive explanation for this unusually high rate of leukemia has been found. And until an explanation is available, I believe that every possible clue should be explored. With this in mind, I visited the school and learned some interesting bits of information not previously uncovered. All but one of the leukemia cases were in 2 classrooms, where the teachers followed the practice of keeping the curtains closed at all times because of the glare from the large areas of glass used in constructing the building. This then meant keeping the high-intensity fluorescent lights on continuously, which at the time of the high leukemia incidence happened to be the Deluxe warm white fluorescent tube, which is the pinkest of any of the standard tubes used for ordinary lighting purposes. In checking all the available records, I learned that this leukemia cluster, as this type of situation is commonly referred to, developed shortly after the teachers in these 2 rooms were transferred to this school and started to keep the curtains closed regardless of the weather and the fluorescent lights turned on all the time. I further learned that this situation had disappeared shortly after these same teachers were transferred on to other schools. And coincidentally, at this same time, all of the Deluxe warm white tubes were old and were replaced with cool white, which, though not a full spectrum type of tube, do represent less distortion than the Deluxe warm white when compared to natural sunlight.
Okay, that was interesting. This is the chain of evidence we're building here, folks. All right, breast cancer versus sunlight. Women who live in the sunniest areas and have the highest exposure to sunlight have a 65% reduction in breast cancer risk compared to those who have the least sunlight exposure. This is from Dr. Edwin Giovannucci of Harvard University, professor of medicine and nutrition. Vitamin D prevents 30 deaths for each death caused by skin cancer. I would challenge anyone to find an area or nutrient or any factor that has such consistent anti-cancer benefits as vitamin D. The data is really quite remarkable, he says. Sun exposure actually increases melanoma survival. Now, this original study enrolled 528 Caucasian residents of Connecticut diagnosed with invasive cutaneous melanoma. Sun exposure was statistically significantly inversely associated with risk of death from melanoma, regardless of the measure used. Inversely. All right, now the next slide. Very important. It's a little wordy. This is 2 slides. But knowing how this study came about will give it credibility, and it will change our thinking on the matter of skin cancer. This is the conclusion. Only about 6% of lesions excised or cut off the skin as melanoma. Let me read that again. Only about 6% of lesions cut out as melanoma actually are melanoma. Now here's this report. Stunningly, the American Academy of Dermatology published a report showing that most melanoma diagnoses may be incorrect. Approximately 44 different authors contributed to that report. They made an accuracy in detection analysis based on the number of melanomas that needed to be excised during a period of 10 years, compared to the actual number that were excised. You see that wound right there? They cut out that flesh. So apparently some were needed and some were not. Let's find out the numbers. Many clinics in different countries were involved in assessing the number. A total of 300,215 cases were found where excision took place. Of those cases, there were only 17,000 out of 300,000. 17,172 melanomas that really required being cut out. That leaves 283,043 that were excised and turned out to be benign lesions. Therefore, there were about 16.5 non-melanoma lesions removed for each lesion that was cancerous, and only about 6% were legitimate cancers. Benign refers to a condition, tumor, or growth that is not cancerous. In other words, 6% means that there is no skin cancer epidemic. But that's not the worst part. I mean, that's good and bad all on its own, but here's the rub. The original diagnosis of melanoma for that 94% who were misdiagnosed and were maimed from that little minor surgery, those diagnoses remained on the books and continues to be left in the cancer statistic, making it still appear as though there is a cancer epidemic of skin cancer. This slide and the next slide validate each other. You'll see why. Here it is. Melanoma has been shown to follow the increase of dermatologists for 33 years. Now we move to the next accusation against sunlight. Myth number 2, we are told that sunscreen prevents cancer. Okay? It's widely accepted across the world. The green line there you see, actually sunscreen seems to enable cancer, and that green line is the increase in sunscreen sales in millions. Melanoma in both sexes followed that line for 64 years. That is not a coincidence. 64 years, that is quite a margin of error. You seeing the patterns happening here? Yeah. Sunscreen seems to enable cancer. The rise in melanoma has been exceptionally high in Queensland, Australia, where the medical establishment has long and vigorously promoted the use of sunscreens. Queensland now has more incidences of melanoma per capita than any other place. Worldwide, the greatest rise in melanoma has been experienced in countries where chemical sunscreens have been heavily promoted. Myth number 3. We are told that our God's sunlight causes cataracts and macular degeneration. This is cataract surgery, replacing a fogged-up lens with a synthetic lens, using a lens speculum to keep the eye open. Look at that carefully, that lens speculum, what it does, because we're going to see it again. Cataracts and macular degeneration. Edward C. Condrot, MD, world's leading homeopathic ophthalmologist. In my residency in ophthalmology, it was widely accepted that UV light is a cause of cataracts and macular degeneration. Yeah. This is based on a study that was published in the American Journal of Ophthalmology, 1982, March. The title was Action Spectrum for Retinal Injury from Near Ultraviolet Radiation in the Aphakic Monkey. The conclusion of this study was that near ultraviolet produced irreparable damage to the rod and cone photoreceptors. But one needs to look closely at the design of this study. That was an understatement. Just so you know, you will not like what you're just about to hear and see. And it gets progressively worse. Here we go. Number 1, those monkeys had their lenses sliced off their eyeballs. thus no lens protection. Number 2, their eyes were then chemically dilated, preventing the normal constriction and protection to bright lights. Number 3, a lid speculum was placed in the eyes to hold the eyes open, preventing even blinking. You seeing a pattern here? I'd call that a demonic pattern. Number 4, a 2,500 watt xenon UV lamp was aimed at their eyes for up to 16 minutes. Well, I was going over this the other day, yesterday. I thought, come on, it can't actually be 2,500 watts. So I looked back up that article, and sure enough, it's still 2,500 watt xenon UV lamp at their eyes. According to Dr. John Ott, this is like someone putting their hand in a blast furnace and concluding that heat is bad for our homes. So what do you think would be a properly calibrated response to this? Revulsion? Rage? Horror? How about simply a decided determination to test every spirit, especially the medical and science spirits? Woe unto them who call evil good and good evil, and put darkness for light and light for darkness. In 1964, this relates, John Ott, along with Dr. Irving Leopold, studied the effects of light on rabbit retinal pigment epithelial cells. They documented that retinal pigment epithelial would not divide unless they were exposed to low levels of ultraviolet light. What this means is that UV light is necessary for our eye health. Severe deprivation of UV light might be a contributing cause of macular degeneration, just the exactly opposite of what we've been told, and we're getting a lot of that, aren't we? Now, when he says that those cells won't divide, that simply means that the cell will not be able to replicate itself or regenerate. So, again, the so-called scientific proof that sunlight causes macular degeneration has been proven to be false. And of course, out of harmony with the Word of God. Yep. Myth number 4. We are told that our God's sunlight causes premature aging. Really? That's compared to what? Living in darkness? Is there a better kind of light that will allow us to live longer? Well, wouldn't that be great? What do you got? Well, let's see. There was a study done on this premature aging thing. All right. Here's the first one. Average lifespan of mice living under different lights. Now, these mice in a laboratory were bred to develop cancerous tumors. And these mice usually live a lot longer than this, but they were bred to die from cancer. All right. Living under direct sunlight, the average lifespan for the group of mice was 16.1 months. All right, so we would expect now that if this one is the most aging, then the other ones will be living longer than 16.1 months, right? Here we go. Whoa, it's not. It's 15.8, living under synthetic quartz glass. Well, that's not bad. Maybe that's just a margin of error. Well, let's see. What else? All right, this next group, 15.6 months, living under UV transmitting plastic. We can buy that, by the way. It's available, it's just expensive. But 15.6 months, that's going down again. That's aging. Well, that can't be. And the next one, 9.4 months. That's a dramatic drop. Living under one pane window glass. That's our windows in our houses, folks. Look at the drop in lifespan. I'm thinking they've been lying to us all this time. Just a hunch. Next one, living under daylight fluorescent, only 8.2 months average. That's half the lifespan of living under direct sunlight. Finally, 7.5 months living under pink or warm fluorescent. I told you about pink. Pink is, anytime you see it relating to light and health, it's not a good thing. So, which kind of light, filtered or otherwise, was actually causing premature aging? All of them, except sunlight. Sunlight doesn't cause premature aging at all. It's the exact opposite. Again, that pattern of the exact opposite we've been told. It's the healthiest light we could live in, and all man-made lights are measured by it. The graph showed that the more sunlight was filtered, the shorter the lifespan. All right, application for this? Premature aging and a shortened lifespan are caused by living behind window glass, windshields, eyeglasses, sunglasses, contact lenses, and living under home and office artificial lighting. It's not the only cause, but the danger of living under fluorescent bulbs wasn't about what it was emitting. It was about what it was not emitting. A very important principle here. It was incomplete, processed light with many wavelengths missing, like ultraviolet and infrared, and a full spectrum of visible light. Malillumination. Now here's another example. They tried to call this premature aging. Years of sun damage as revealed via UV light. Now there are many, many images like this, which are claiming that these spots are sun damage. Really? Because they just say so? There is no scientific evidence where they studied those things happening when they just had direct sunlight. I think they just deem it so. The light of the sun spreads out evenly, yet is not what we are seeing here in these images deposits, freckles, acne damage, liver spots. By the way, liver spots were renamed sunspots to promote fear and sell drugs. Dr. Kellogg said that when certain organs become overworked or crippled, some waste products are deposited into the skin. Kellogg talked his entire career about the toxic nature of meat and how it overworks the liver and kidneys, etc. Charlotte Gerson, daughter of Max Gerson, founder of the Gerson Therapy, held her hand out for the camera and said, "Look, no liver spots." She was an old woman at the time. She ate a clean vegan diet, no meat. We are not supposed to have liver spots, folks. Eating like the Garden of Eden, you don't get liver spots. I think it would be very interesting to do a facial UV study that compared the skin of lifelong vegans to the skin of lifelong meat eaters. Myth number 5, or accusation number 5. We are told that cancer develops on the skin that is most exposed to sunlight. Think that's true? Oh, you know it's not going to be true. Yet it's been shown that approximately 75% of the tumors occur on the relatively unexposed body sites. Again, exactly opposite of what we've been told. Myth number 6, we are told that 15 minutes per day of sunlight to face and hands is all we need. See, now the result of that claim is that we gain a false sense of security that we are getting enough sunlight to stay healthy when we are not. According to Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, this was a long time ago, 2/3 of the population in the United States live in cities, and nearly all are suffering from lack of contact of the skin, of the sun with skin. Simply exposing the skin of the face and hands to the sun is not sufficient, he says. The skin area varies, but totals for the average adult is 15 to 20 square feet. The skin area of the face and hands is less than 1/10 of the total, less than. Amazing recoveries at the sun care clinics were not achieved with 15 minutes a day to hand and face. It was daily, full body exposure that enabled such miraculous results. We are to get as much sunlight as possible. 15 minutes to face and hands may help us to survive, but we will not thrive with it. It's far from therapeutic levels. By the way, these patients did not spend all day in the sunlight. They had graduated sessions of therapy, leading to eventual ability to be in the sun all day, working. Accusation number 7. We are told that skin cancer is more likely if we have ever been sunburned seriously. Individuals who had ever been severely sunburned or who had high levels of intermittent sun exposure were less likely to die from melanoma than individuals who had never been severely sunburned or who had low levels of intermittent sun exposure, respectively. Opposite of what we've been told. Accusation against God's sunlight number 8. We are told that our God's sunlight causes sunburn. What? That's a myth? If you think that's hard to believe, wait till you see this one. We're going to address them both at the same time. Myth number 9, we are told that tanning is a protective mechanism. This has been so prolific that it's practically wired into our thinking. You're probably looking at me right now and saying, blasphemy, heresy. Well, we'll see. We are told that tanning is a protective mechanism against sunlight triggered by sunburn. These two myths are combined because they go hand in hand. Can't talk about one without talking about the other. So we start with sunburn. So what about the whole very idea of sunburn? Does it seem right to you that God would create our sun to burn us? Did it burn Adam and Eve? Yet no one can deny that sunlight causes sunburn, right? It's just a given. Yet God pronounced sunlight good. And God's word is never wrong. God cannot lie. So we have a conundrum, don't we? God's unfailing word versus man's undeniable experience. Are we to deny our own experience? Yeah, of course. Let God be true, but every man a liar. Romans 3:4. We are to deny our own experience, our own senses, if they contradict God's word, which leaves only one conclusion, and there is an answer to this. Man has done or is doing something that is out of harmony with God's Eden health principles, thus thwarting or distorting the healing rays of God's sunlight, causing unnatural reactions. What do you think of that? All right. When scientists first isolated ultraviolet rays, they experimented and found that UV light caused reactions in many different chemicals. So they named this band of UV light chemical rays. And the pioneers used that term all the time. I know, I have many of their books. Could it be that sunburn isn't a burn at all, but rather a reaction to unnatural toxic chemicals and frankenfoods which have found their way into our bodies? Sunlight was just trying to do its job, but foreign chemicals thwarted that. As I started researching this theory, I immediately began to find confirmation. The next slide lists some of the known chemicals that cause the so-called sun sensitivities, blaming the sun instead of the chemicals. All right. Causing sunburn, sun allergies, sun toxicities, rashes. Those are all misnomers, by the way. Foods, high-fat processed foods, vegetable oils, fried foods, sugar, and artificial sweeteners. You know, sugar's in everything that man has touched or processed. Alcohol, modern grains, food additives, chlorophyll, a zinc deficiency. Now that's useful. Under chemicals, toxic chemicals, chemo and radiation. Yes, chemo and radiation. Pharmaceuticals, many of those. Antibiotics, skin care products, sunscreens. You understand that is irony, right? Perfumes and essential oils. Heavy metals, such as that come in things like vaccines and fillings, disinfectants, anything that weakens the liver. These things are the lifelong norm for the typical American. Now, the next slides tells how our bodies are supposed to react in sunlight when we clean up that chemical dump in our bodies. This is a little excerpt from an article I found, Why I Don't Use or Need Sunscreen. He says, after changing my diet and ditching the frankenfats in favor of real fats, I found I just don't burn like I once did. If I spend 4 hours doing farm work on a sunny afternoon, my arms and face get a little browner, and that's it. Seeing how the change in diet changed my skin's reaction to sunlight got me thinking, why would the sun be dangerous to humans in the first place? It makes no sense. We need sun on our skin to produce vitamin D naturally, right? And here's another article, an excerpt from a lady named Katie Wells, Why I Eat My Sunscreen. She says, I am partially Irish-Scottish, which is Latin for very fair-skinned, and had always burned. In fact, even moderate sun exposure would leave me with a pinkish glow rather than a tan, until several years ago. Ooh, what is that? Since going grain-free, sugar-free, etc., and incorporating more healthy fats and vegetables, I have noticed I have a higher tolerance to the sun. Not only don't burn, but I am able to stay out in the sun longer without the tiniest bit of pink. And I tan more easily than I ever have before, which is saying something since I have red hair. I started working in the garden for hours at a time during the heat of the day without burning. We also went to Florida for vacation, and I was at the beach for 4 hours between 11 to 3 with no sunscreen, and I didn't burn at all. Now it's me talking here. I had that same sort of burnless experience in the sun when I went through an 11-day lifestyle healthcare program in Battle Creek. You know, if a sunburn isn't what we've been led to believe, then neither is tanning, is it? Did you notice that her detoxified body didn't actually require itself to turn pink before tanning? That is wildly significant here. It tells us that tanning is not a response to skin damage from burning. Well, what is it? If our bodies can tan without first burning or even turning pink, then tanning is not a protective mechanism triggered by sunburn. Is that soaking in? Which finally fits. For why would God create our sun for our health and then protect us from it? That sun is his proxy that represents his light, his righteousness, his goodness. When he placed Adam and Eve in the garden in the sunlight all day, every day naked, did they then have to be protected from that sunlight? Was his sun faulty? No. God said it was good. That was God showing us, demonstrating that sunlight is good. So what is the purpose of a tan? Because all modern day science say it's protective. So we have to conjecture here. And we have some help from history. What is the purpose of tan, if not for protection from the sun? The answer must be something that is in harmony with sunlight good, with God's word. History may again provide the answer. All right. The pioneer practitioners of the sun cure treated end-stage TB patients successfully with sunlight for decades. And they observed something quite unexpected having to do with the purpose of the tan. You ready? Tanning accelerated healing. This is Dr. Harris speaking. It has been a common observation that the cure of a tuberculosis patient parallels roughly the degree of skin pigmentation, tanning. The greater the pigmentation, the more rapid the cure. Can you believe this? A common observation among the pioneer practitioners of heliotherapy. Ask yourself this question: how is it that such an amazing discovery like that got buried? This is remarkable, and that burial was intentional. Tanning doesn't protect us from the sun. Tanning makes sunlight more effective for healing. We've just seen that the protection from burning comes from a clean, natural diet, not tanning. Tan skin should be our natural estate. Dr. Kellogg didn't look at tanning as a protective mechanism from sunlight. They referred to a bronzed body as a healthy tan. Remember when we were kids, it used to be called that? It still is. But we've also been told that a tan makes it difficult to produce vitamin D. Wait a minute. You think that's true too? What if that's not true? We think it's true. That's almost hardwired in us as well. If that's true, why would God do that? If vitamin D is as important as we have been led to believe, then why would God shut it off as we tan? Something's off here. And right when we were demonstrating to God that we are serious about using His sunlight, don't we need to build up a store of it in our bodies to carry us through the winter? That's what we've always thought, heard, been told. All right, so for the sake of argument, let's just say that it's true that tanning diminishes vitamin D production. Given that these pioneers tell us that the greater the pigmentation, the more rapid the cure, we may reasonably therefore suspect that vitamin D may not be the only healing mechanism in sunlight. And that perhaps vitamin D may become less necessary as we tan. Oh, this is bordering on heresy. We don't know this. We're just speculating, but it fits sunlight good, doesn't it? Let me read it again. That perhaps vitamin D may become less necessary as we tan. And we know that our bodies and nature have backup, overlapping, redundant health systems. If a tan shuts off vitamin D, then we may suspect that something else takes over. What if vitamin D is more of a first stage sort of mechanism that opens the way for the next phase of healing as we tan? This is still in harmony with sunlight good. On page 24 of Dr. Rollier's book, Heliotherapy, 1927, Dr. Rollier addresses that. Dr. Roselette and I were able to prove that the actions of ultraviolet rays is a superficial one, and that they become, those UV rays, they become, as it were, exhausted in the upper skin layers when pigmentation takes place. Since, however, I find that patients with deep-seated TB are cured when they have become pigmented, I must logically conclude that it is just this pigmentation that renders deep penetration of the long rays possible. What's this mean? There are also deeper penetrating rays whose bactericidal power is considerable. The long-wave red rays, and in particularly the infrared ones, have strong bactericidal properties, which may partially explain the accelerated healing as we tan. It enables the increased killing rate of harmful bacteria such as TB. And if this is true, it means that sunlight therapy takes time, consistent, persevering time, to allow all the stages of sunlight's healing properties to work. You know, there's like 1,500 different wavelengths of sunlight, right? And they are there for all sorts of different reasons that we do not understand. We have not been privileged to God's understanding on this. This is why I focus on history's stories of healing rather than the theories of today's merchants of pharmakeia who have absolutely no experience treating patients with sunlight, only that false theory that claims that God's sunlight is bad. This is why we test every spirit. If they contradict God when He says sunlight is good, then they have no credibility. There is no light in them. Now, Here is Dr. Kellogg's observations on the value of tanning from a completely different perspective altogether. Yet both Rollier's and Kellogg's observations can coexist in harmony and are consistent with sunlight good. Ready? Improved circulation of the skin, which accompanies the pigmentation, is always attended by relief from a multitude of disagreeable symptoms. Really? Where was that in the medical literature? Anyone practice that? That is amazing. And if these general light applications are supplemented by other indicated physiological measures and by proper regulation of the diet and general habits of life, multitudes of cases incurable by other means may be, in the course of a few months, restored to excellent health. Thank God for these pioneers, literally. That is amazing. No wonder sunlight has been attacked so aggressively for so long by Satan and his agents. This is an enormous, brilliantly shining gem of healing information. Lord, forgive us that we have ever doubted you when you told us that sunlight was good. Here's an application. We need to get the sick into the sunlight and get them tanned to give them relief from a multitude of disagreeable symptoms. The sick must be tanned, as do we all. Now the question is asked, just how does tanning and an improved skin circulation accelerate healing? He told us that it does, but he didn't really explain how. Well, Dr. Kellogg has some pretty powerful things to say about that. Starting with this. Phototherapy, that includes sunlight and artificial lights. Phototherapy is a useful means of producing local and general hyperemia of the skin for relief of the visceral congestion, which is rarely absent in chronic disease. Hyperemia means extra blood. So the skin filled with blood. Visceral congestion means congestion of the internal organs, which is rarely absent in chronic disease. The pallor of the skin, which is nearly always present in chronic invalids, signifies not only anemia of the skin, but necessarily implies also congestion of the viscera. The general muscular weakness, he's diverting here a moment, the general muscular weakness which accompanies chronic disease prevents exercise, so that the muscles, as well as the skin, are anemic, and that's not good. The importance of this fact will be recognized when it is considered that the muscles, when active, are capable of holding 1/2 of all the blood in the body. The idle muscles contain not more than 1/4 or 1/6 as much blood as the active muscles. He's going someplace with this. A pale skin and inactive muscles necessarily imply congested viscera. This chronic congestion of vital organs necessarily results in derangement of functions and often in change of structure. That cannot be good, folks. All right, in other words, light therapy, in this case a tan, can restore the normal balance of circulation, which will decongest the internal organs and relieve a multitude of disagreeable symptoms. And as a reminder, we also learned in the Sun Cure Movement presentation that sunlight can also develop and tone muscles even in bedridden patients if they are regularly in the sunlight. So, sunlight does both of these automatically when we are regularly in the sun. Now that is a healthcare system. Automatically, we don't do anything, we don't try. It just happens when we're in God's outdoor environment and expose ourselves to it. Does both, decongest vital organs and builds muscles. We don't even have to think about it. We just have to get as much sunlight as possible in as much skin as possible regularly. It's part of God's magnificent outdoor healthcare system. Now, Dr. Kellogg is about to tell us what relief from chronic congestion of vital internal organs means. what it can do. And he illustrates the decongesting benefits of a tan by reminding his readers how much a sunburn and an electric light bath cabinet relieve internal organs. That was the first electric sauna, which we'll get to in a bit. He's a bit wordy, but when he's done, we will clearly understand the importance of a tan's ability to decongest internal organs and balance the circulation. Starting with sunburn, Dr. Kellogg says, the intense reddening of the skin, which appears usually within 10 or 12 hours after a sufficiently prolonged exposure to intense actinic rays, UV, is evidence of a complete relaxation of the vessels in the skin and filling of these vessels with blood to an extraordinary degree. It's not a burn you're looking at, that's blood coming to the surface, but it's called a burn. It's a misnomer again. The skin is capable of holding, when these vessels are fully distended, 1/2 to 2/3 of all the blood in the body. The therapeutic significance of this fact lies in the influence which congestion of the skin exercises upon the blood volume of internal parts. If the blood supply of the skin is within a short time increased from a small fraction of the total blood volume to 1/3 or 1/2 of the whole amount of blood contained in the body, then, and here's the kicker, it is evident that we possess in artificial congestion of the skin a method whereby we may quickly withdraw from the great vascular organs of the trunk from 1/4 to 1/2 of their total contents. Thus, here it is, affording almost instant relief to a congested liver, engorged spleen, hyperemic lungs, inflamed stomach or intestines, or congested spinal cord. And that was not a complete list. So keep in mind that Kellogg is not recommending sunburn. No. Still, more effects are described for the Sanitarium light bath cabinet in the next slide. This is an electric light bath cabinet. That one is mine. This is Dr. Kellogg's incandescent electric light bath cabinet. He invented it soon after his friend Thomas Edison perfected the light bulb. This is an infrared sauna powered by 50 Edison light bulbs, original, and lined with mirrors all the way around it. Treatment is between 6 minutes to half an hour, depending on the reason for using it. Since I own one of these things and I use it, I know the therapeutic value. He continues, by a daily repetition of this procedure, think of this as tan as well, by a daily repetition of this procedure, normal conditions are gradually restored here. The circulation of the skin becomes more and more active, and the amount of blood in the over-distended internal organ is diminished. The enlarged liver, the enlarged spleen contract, the congested sympathetic nerve centers return to the normal state, and the vital resistance of the tissues is increased. The inflammation of mucous membranes of the stomach and intestines and biliary passages disappear. The digestive secretions acquire their normal characteristics. The liver, adrenals, and lymphatic glands and other poison-destroying organs resume their functions. The various symptoms of autointoxication disappear. The skin requires its natural elasticity and color, and the patient gradually returns to the normal state. This is why Dr. Kellogg said the improved circulation of the skin, which accompanies the pigmentation, is always attended by relief from a multitude of disagreeable symptoms. Yes, a sunburn can do this. A light bath cabinet can do this. A infrared sauna can do this. A tan can do this. And hydrotherapy, consistently done, can do this. But a tan has by far the greatest all-around benefits and lasts the longest. So how long does the good skin circulation of a thorough tan last? Isn't that a good question? Fortunately, they had an answer. Hasselbach noted that the increased vascularity of the skin, circulation, induced by light lasts for 6 to 9 months. Does sunbathing boost the immune system? That's a reasonable question to ask. Yeah, Dr. Kellogg says the increase of leukocytes occurs within half an hour after a general sunlight application, and may amount to as much as 90% increase. The average, however, increases about 25 to 30%. The remarkable increase in the immunizing power of the blood demonstrated by Dr. Leonard Heal and his associates suggests that the skin may play an important part in defending the body against infection by raising the immunizing power of the blood under the influence of sunlight rays. Dr. Kellogg continues, the tanned skin is able to defend itself against cold and to protect the body against disease much more efficiently than the pale anemic skin which has not been kissed by the sun. That's a lot to take in, isn't it? The pigmented skin of one habituated to sun exposure is much more resistant to infection. Febrile rashes, such as chickenpox, affect least the well-pigmented areas. So what does the pen of inspiration say about sunlight and the sick? Oh, she said a lot, but I'm just going to give you one. Oh, it's a beautiful statement. The feeble one should press out into the sunshine as earnestly and naturally as do the shaded plants and vines. The pale and sickly green blade that has struggled up out of the cold of early spring puts out the natural and healthy deep green after enjoying for a few days the health and life-giving rays of the sun. Go out into the light and warmth of the glorious sun, you pale and sickly ones, and share with vegetation its life-giving, health-dealing power. Among civilized people, this is Dr. Kellogg talking, the skin is universally anemic and enfeebled by the universal practice of overclothing. In view of the important functions of the skin, there should be a widespread campaign to introduce sunbathing and the construction of sunny, open-air gymnasiums, such as was at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. The Battle Creek Sanitarium had over 1,000 different baths and therapies, yet sunlight was considered to be one of their most effective treatments. All right, let's bring this back on around to cancer and sunlight and wrap this up. Dr. Kellogg says, persons who have been subjected to operations or other treatments for cancer should take care to have their skins thoroughly tanned and keep them tanned by applications of natural or artificial sunlight. Sunlight should also be employed as a preventive measure in all cases in which there is a hereditary predisposition to cancer. These TB patients at Leysen, Switzerland, spent more time in the sunlight and had more skin exposure than anyone, some of them for years. Yet they never developed cancer. If there was ever any group of people whose immune system were seriously compromised, and it was these near-death patients at Leysen. They would have been wildly susceptible to cancer if sunlight actually caused cancer. These sun cure patients also proved that cancer is not caused by sunlight, and that when placed on a cleansing vegetarian diet, they were no longer sensitive to sunlight and they no longer burned. As we come to the end of this presentation, we cannot help but notice an interesting parallel. And here it is. If we approach the light of God's presence in a spiritually polluted state, His light will be as a consuming fire to us. If we approach God's proxy light, sunlight, in a physically polluted state, we will also burn. In conclusion, as we have tested here the medical science that calls God's light darkness and darkness light, the pattern is revealed and the conviction takes hold that it is spiritual and medical madness to place man's reason and science above God's revelations. It is the God of Israel alone who heals us. His agencies alone are blessed. Everything else is a counterfeit. God bids us use the natural agencies he has provided to cooperate with him in healing us. He blesses his agencies for our healing as we use them. And using them is a public expression of our trust in God as our healer and protector. We are to be witnesses for the power of his blessed healing agents. Yet to be the most effective witnesses, the most effective medical missionaries, and the healthiest we can be, we must reboot our health reform efforts and start at the very beginning. And God saw the light that it was good.